Hello, English learners, and welcome back to English in Advance. I'm Jessica, and I'm so happy you've decided to join me today. Are you looking to truly improve your English listening and writing skills, not just by studying rules, but by living the language? Well, you are in exactly the right place. In today's episode, we are going to dive into a very real story, a journey from my own life. And as you listen along, you'll pick up incredibly valuable lessons that can transform the way you approach both listening to and writing in English. So please, find a comfortable seat, relax, and get ready to learn through a story. Have you ever found yourself in a new place, a new city or country, and felt that sinking feeling of being completely and utterly lost? Or perhaps you've been in a conversation where you were trying so hard to find the right words in English, struggling to express yourself. But even through the struggle, you felt a real connection with the other person. How do you imagine you would react if you were suddenly placed in an unfamiliar situation, a place where you had to rely completely on your English to communicate? I want you to hold that thought in your mind as we journey through today's story together, because the feelings and strategies we explore might be more familiar than you think. Let me take you back a few years, to a time when I traveled to a small, picturesque town nestled deep in the countryside with my husband, Mark. We were both so excited for the trip, a chance to escape the noise and rush of city life for a few days. We had booked a small cottage, packed our bags, and set off with dreams of quiet walks and peaceful evenings. We truly didn't expect the adventure that was waiting for us. As we arrived, driving down the narrow, winding streets, I quickly realized that this town was wonderfully authentic. It was small, charming, and most of the people didn't speak English very well, if at all. It was a place untouched by the usual tourist trails. We tried our best to communicate, using smiles and simple greetings, but it was certainly challenging. There was one particular moment. It was our first evening, and we were getting hungry. We needed to find a place to eat, a local restaurant maybe. We found a small shop that was still open and went inside. The shopkeeper was a lovely elderly woman with a kind smile, but we couldn't understand her local accent at all. We tried asking for a recommendation. Restaurant? Food? But our words seemed to hang in the air, misunderstood. It made us laugh at first, a nervous, slightly helpless laugh. But it also brought a sudden, clear realization of how incredibly important it is to be able to communicate effectively in different situations. What did I do in that moment of confusion? Well, I had to rely on a few simple techniques I had learned over time. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves, and I consciously tried to slow down my speech. I made sure to pronounce the single word, eat, very clearly, but words alone weren't working. So, I turned to the universal language, body language. I smiled warmly, pointed to my stomach, and then made a motion of eating with my hands. The woman's eyes lit up with understanding. She smiled back, a genuine, warm smile, and then started speaking in her language, pointing down the street. It was still difficult to understand her directions, so I pulled out my phone. I didn't have an internet connection, but I did have an offline map of the town. I pointed to our current location on the map, then looked at her with a questioning expression. She understood immediately. She took my phone gently and traced a path with her finger on the screen. showing us the exact route to a small family-run restaurant just a few blocks away. This simple interaction made a huge difference. We were able to get the help we needed, and it was a powerful reminder that English, or any language, is ultimately a tool for communication. It's not just a collection of words and grammar rules on a paper. So, I want you to think about this for a moment. When you find yourself in a new situation, do you feel confident speaking English, or do you find yourself hesitating, holding back, worrying that you might say something wrong or that you might not be understood? Let's just pause here and reflect on how you might handle a similar situation to mine. Remember, speaking English isn't just about perfect grammar or a huge vocabulary. It's about connecting with other human beings. It's about understanding different accents and being clear in your message, even if you have to use more than just words. In my story, I wasn't just using English words. I was using a whole collection of strategies to make sure I could communicate effectively. This is such an important lesson, whether you're traveling, at work, or just having a simple conversation with someone new. You need to think about how to make your message clear, and that is precisely what today's episode is all about. Listening to how people communicate in different situations, and learning how you can apply these strategies to improve your own English skills. As you continue to listen to this story, pay close attention to the phrases and expressions I use. These are the kinds of phrases you can use when you find yourself in a similar situation. For example, when you're asking for directions, simple and polite phrases like, "Could you please help me?" or "I'm not familiar with this area," are incredibly useful. And sometimes a phrase like, "Could you explain that again, please?" is the most powerful tool you have. Now, let me share another experience from my personal life that I believe can help you improve both your listening and your speaking skills in a profound way. A few years ago, my husband and I were attending a large community event in a different city. It was a summer barbecue hosted by a local organization, and we didn't know a single person there. At first, I felt quite nervous. I stood by the food table, holding a paper plate, not knowing how to start a conversation with complete strangers in English. The fear of saying the wrong thing, of being awkward, was very real. But then, I remembered something incredibly important I had learned. People genuinely love to talk about their own experiences. It's a universal human truth. So, I decided to try it. I saw a woman standing near the grill, and I walked over and simply asked her, "What's your favorite thing about community events like this?" I was amazed by what happened next. Her face lit up, and the conversation just flowed. She started talking about her family, her work, and her love for the neighborhood. I was listening carefully to her answers, not thinking about what I would say next, but genuinely interested in her story. I realized how much easier it was to respond in English when I was truly engaged in what the other person was saying. I didn't worry about making grammar mistakes. I was just focused on understanding her and enjoying the connection we were making. What about you? When you're in a conversation, do you listen actively? Are you fully engaged with the other person? Or do you sometimes find your mind wandering, zoning out, thinking about your own response instead of hearing theirs? Active listening is a skill, and like any skill, It takes practice. The more you practice listening carefully, intentionally, the easier it will be to have real, meaningful conversations in English. In fact, today's story and my personal experiences are all examples of how you can improve your listening skills while also practicing your speaking. Remember, every single time you hear a new word or a new phrase, you're one step closer to mastering English, whether it's through stories like these or through your own real-life experiences. Every moment you spend listening and practicing makes a significant difference. So, after that barbecue experience, I realized how incredibly important it is to stay confident, even when you're not 100% sure about what you're saying. Sometimes, we get so focused on perfect grammar and flawless pronunciation that we forget the main goal of communication, which is simply to understand each other. It really doesn't matter if your English isn't perfect. What truly matters is that you're making an effort, that you're trying to connect with people. During that event, I also learned how important it is to listen closely. Sometimes people don't speak in the clearest way, especially if they have a strong accent or if they speak very quickly. But by listening carefully and not interrupting, you give yourself the chance to really understand what they mean. I remember one conversation in particular with an older gentleman. I didn't catch everything he said at first, but I just waited for a natural pause in the conversation. And then I asked a few clarifying questions. In the end, I understood him perfectly, and we had a wonderful chat about his life. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. When you're having a conversation in English, how do you feel about asking someone to repeat something if you don't understand? Do you feel comfortable doing that? Or do you worry that you'll sound rude or unintelligent? I know some learners are very hesitant to ask for repetition, but trust me, it's actually a fantastic way to practice your listening. It gives you another chance to hear the sentence again, and it helps you improve your understanding of different accents and speaking styles. For example, when I was in that small town with my husband, Mark, I asked the local people to repeat what they said a few times. At first, it felt a little awkward. I won't deny that, but it was the best and only way to improve my understanding. I remember that kind woman in the shop. She was speaking in a thick regional accent, and I didn't understand some of the words she used to describe the restaurant. So, I just smiled politely and said, "I'm so sorry, could you say that again, please?" And she was more than happy to help. She slowed down and repeated herself. That small act really boosted my confidence, and I realized that people generally appreciate it when you make a genuine effort to communicate, even if it means asking for clarification. Asking for repetition isn't just a way to improve your listening skills, it also gives you an opportunity to use new vocabulary and practice your pronunciation. After hearing the same sentence again, you can try saying it back to the person to confirm your understanding, or even just repeat it quietly in your mind. This kind of active practice is incredibly helpful, especially for those of us learning English as a second language. Here's another situation where I had to use my listening skills effectively. One day, I had a very important phone call with a colleague named Daniel. The connection wasn't great, and I didn't understand the first few things he said. At first, I started to panic a little. My mind started racing. What if I can't follow the conversation? What if I miss something important? But then I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus on the key points. I made a conscious effort to listen for the most important information, like names of people, specific places, and important dates. It was a bit challenging, but by focusing on those key details, I was able to follow the main thread of the conversation and provide my input confidently. Now, when you're in a similar situation, how do you stay calm and focused? Do you know how to find the important details in a fast-moving conversation? Let me give you some tips based on my experience. First, try to stay calm, even if you don't understand everything. Panic makes it much harder to listen. Take a moment to think about the context of the conversation. Is the person talking about something familiar to you? Are they giving you directions? Or maybe talking about a recent event? Identifying the main idea can help you follow along, even if some of the words are unclear. Another important lesson from my experiences is that listening and speaking go hand in hand. They are two sides of the same coin. The more you listen, the better your speaking becomes. And the more you speak, the better you become at listening. When you listen to real-life conversations, whether it's on the phone, in a meeting, or during a casual chat with a friend, you start to recognize common phrases and expressions. These are the very phrases you can then use in your own conversations, making you sound more natural and fluent. Let me give you a clear example. I once had a conversation with a neighbor about their beautiful new garden. At first, I wasn't sure how to respond when they told me about all their plans for the new plants and flowers. But then, I remembered a few simple phrases I'd heard in other conversations before. Phrases like, "Oh, that sounds absolutely exciting," or, "Wow, that must have been a lot of work." These simple, encouraging phrases helped me keep the conversation going, and I didn't feel stuck or awkward. Listening to others gives you the chance to pick up these useful expressions and use them in your own conversations. So, do you feel confident using these kinds of phrases? Are you able to use them naturally in a conversation, or do you still need some practice? This is something that takes time, and the more you practice, the easier it becomes. Remember, listening is not just about hearing words. It's about understanding the message behind those words, and the more you understand, the more confident you will feel when it's your turn to speak English. Keep practicing, and pay close attention to how people express themselves in everyday situations. Over time, you'll notice your own ability to communicate improving dramatically. Let's take another moment to reflect. How can you practice listening in your daily life? Maybe you can start by listening to podcasts on a topic you love, or watching videos in English with subtitles, or even just striking up a small conversation with a shopkeeper or a neighbor. The more you expose yourself to English in real-life situations, the faster your skills will improve. Let's continue and dive even deeper into how you can improve your listening and speaking skills. It's all about practice, exposure, and keeping your mind open to new experiences. So, let's go even further with how you can apply these skills to your own life. Imagine this scene. You're at a busy airport, about to board a flight for your dream vacation. You hear the announcements over the loudspeaker, but the speaker has a very thick accent, and you struggle to catch the vital information. You can feel a wave of anxiety building up inside you because you're not sure if you heard the right gate number or if the flight is on time. What do you do in that situation? Do you panic, or do you stay calm and find a way to solve the problem? Well, here's a real story from my own experience. A few years ago, I was at an airport in another country. The announcements were in English, but the speaker had a very strong accent that I just wasn't used to. I couldn't understand most of what was being said, and I started to feel very nervous. But instead of panicking, I decided to use a strategy that had worked for me before. I focused on all the visual cues around me. I looked at the large departure boards. I watched which direction other people with similar luggage were moving. And I saw the boarding information clearly displayed on the screen at the gate. I didn't understand everything I heard, but I knew I could trust the signs and the visual information. After a few minutes of careful observation, I realized I was at the right gate, and everything was perfectly fine. This experience taught me another valuable lesson. Sometimes listening isn't just about hearing the exact words. It's about gathering information from different sources, like visual clues or body language, and putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And the more you practice this, the better you'll get at combining different strategies to understand English in real-life situations. Now, think about your own experiences. Have you ever been in a situation like this, where you couldn't understand someone clearly? Maybe you were at a restaurant, and the waiter had an accent you weren't familiar with. Or maybe you were in a work meeting, and the person speaking used a lot of technical terms you didn't know. How did you handle it? Were you able to stay calm and figure things out? It's so important to remember that all English learners face these challenges. But every single time you encounter a situation like this, you are improving. You're practicing your skills, not just in understanding the words, but in understanding the context and using all the information you have to make sense of what's happening. Let's take another example. A few months ago, I was having a conversation with my husband, Mark, about a trip we were planning to take. We were talking about different places we could visit, and Mark mentioned a specific location in a faraway country. He was so excited that he spoke very quickly, and I didn't catch everything at first. I felt a flash of frustration because I wanted to understand every single detail of the conversation. But then I remembered something important. It's okay if you don't understand every single word. The key is to focus on the main idea. So, instead of getting stuck on the words I didn't understand, I focused on the bigger picture of the conversation. I simply asked Mark to slow down a little and repeat a few key points. Once he did, I was able to understand the crucial information, like the destination, the potential budget, and the travel dates. By asking for clarification and focusing on the main details, I was able to participate in the conversation effectively and share in his excitement. Think about how this strategy could help you in your own conversations. When you're speaking with someone, don't worry too much about missing a word here and there. Instead, try to understand the general meaning of what they're saying. And if you really don't understand something important, don't ever hesitate to ask for clarification. Now, let's shift gears a little bit. We've been talking a lot about listening in real-life situations, But it's also important to talk about how listening can help you with your writing skills. Yes, you heard that right. Listening can directly improve your writing. How, you ask? Well, when you listen to natural conversations, whether it's in movies, podcasts, or conversations with others, you hear how native speakers organize their thoughts and use sentences in different ways. These real-life examples help you understand how to structure your own writing to make it more effective and natural. For example, when I listen to a podcast or a conversation in English, I pay special attention to how the speaker starts a sentence and how they transition to new ideas. You'll notice that they use phrases like, for example, or, on the other hand, or what I mean is, to make their point clear. These are phrases that can also be used in your own writing to make your ideas flow more smoothly. Listening gives you a sense of the natural rhythm of the language, and by understanding how sentences are built, you can use that knowledge to improve your own writing. Whether you're writing an important essay for school, a professional email for work, or even a simple text message to a friend, listening to how people speak will help you express yourself more clearly and naturally in writing. Think about it this way. The next time you write something in English, try to imagine how it would sound if you were saying it out loud. Does it flow naturally? Are there any parts that sound a bit awkward or clunky? By improving your listening skills, you'll naturally start to write better too. The more you listen, the more you'll understand how English works in real-life conversations, and the more you'll be able to apply that knowledge to your writing. Now, let's explore how you can use listening to improve your vocabulary. One of the absolute best ways to learn new words and phrases is by hearing them used in context. Have you ever heard a word that you didn't know, but after hearing it a few times in different conversations, you started to understand what it meant? That's the power of learning through listening. I remember the first time I heard the phrase, "get the hang of it." At first, I had no idea what it meant, but after hearing it in several different conversations, I figured out from the context that it meant to become familiar with something, or to understand how something works. The more I heard it used in context, the easier it was to remember, and then use the phrase myself. This is exactly how vocabulary acquisition works naturally. By hearing words in context and repeating them, you naturally start to remember them and use them in your own conversations. The same goes for idioms and phrasal verbs. These are common expressions in English that don't always make sense when you translate them literally, word for word. But by listening to them in real conversations, you start to get a feel for their meaning and how they're used. For example, when I first heard the phrase "in the long run," I didn't know exactly what it meant, but after hearing it used in different situations, like in a business meeting or in a casual conversation about life plans, I understood that it refers to the future or over a long period of time. Listening to real-life conversations helps you pick up these wonderful expressions and use them in your own speech and writing. It also helps you improve your pronunciation. The more you hear how words are pronounced by native speakers, the easier it becomes for you to say them correctly. Now, I want to ask you a question. Do you actively listen for new words and phrases when you're listening to something in English? Or do you just let them pass by without paying much attention? It's important to make a conscious effort to learn from what you hear. When you come across a new word or expression that you find interesting, try to repeat it a few times in your own sentences. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become in using new vocabulary. Let's take a quick break here and think about your listening practice. Do you regularly listen to podcasts, watch movies, or read books in English? If not, this is a great time to start. Even just 10 or 15 minutes a day can make a huge difference in your progress. Start by listening to something that genuinely interests you, whether it's about travel, food, technology, or any topic you're passionate about. The enjoyment will make the learning process feel effortless. Let's continue on this journey of improving your listening and speaking skills with even more practical insights and real-life examples. Now, we've already talked about using listening to improve your vocabulary, your writing, and how to deal with tricky situations. But there's another really important part of listening that can make a huge difference in your English skills, and that is active listening. Active listening is very different from just passively hearing what someone is saying. It's when you pay your full attention not only to the words being spoken, but also to the tone, the emotions, and the context behind those words. It's about truly engaging with what the speaker is saying and trying to understand the bigger message, not just the literal meaning of the words. Let me tell you about a time when active listening helped me in a conversation with my husband, Mark. A while ago, he was telling me about something that happened at his work. He was describing a situation where a colleague had misunderstood something he said in a team meeting. As he spoke, I could tell he was a bit frustrated. His tone was slightly tense, and he paused a few times before explaining how he eventually cleared up the misunderstanding. At that moment, I didn't just focus on what Mark was saying. I paid close attention to his emotions and his body language. I could see that he was feeling a bit stressed, and I knew I had to respond in a way that was supportive, instead of just saying something simple like, "Oh, that's bad," I responded by saying, "I can understand why you'd feel frustrated by that. It sounds like you handled it really well, though, by explaining it more clearly." By practicing active listening, I not only understood the situation he was describing, but I also connected with him on a deeper emotional level. This made the conversation much more meaningful, and it helped me feel more confident in responding appropriately in your own English learning journey. Active listening can help you understand emotions and intentions, which is especially useful in real-life conversations. It's not just about learning vocabulary and grammar. It's about learning how to communicate effectively by understanding the full message. Now, let's dive deeper into how you can use active listening to improve your speaking skills. Have you ever been in a conversation where you didn't quite understand what the other person was saying, but you could tell by their tone of voice that they were excited or worried or passionate about something? Active listening helps you pick up on these crucial clues, and this can guide your response. For example, I remember a time when I was speaking with my friend Clara about her new job. At first, she was speaking in a very calm, neutral tone, but as she talked more about her first week, I noticed her tone started to change. She became more excited and energetic, especially when she spoke about her favorite part of the job. I could tell that she was really enjoying it, and because I was actively listening, I picked up on that change in her tone. So, I responded with more enthusiasm myself. I said, "Wow, Clara, it sounds like you're really loving your new job. What's your favorite part about it so far?" This made Clara feel heard and understood, and it led to a much deeper conversation where she shared more about her experiences. When you're practicing English, try to pay attention to the emotional undertones in conversations, whether it's in podcasts, movies, or with real people. Understanding these emotional cues can help you respond in a more natural and engaging way. This is a key part of communication, and it'll help you sound much more fluent when you're speaking. Now, let's talk about listening in different environments. Sometimes it's easy to get frustrated when you don't understand English in noisy places or unfamiliar situations. But the key is to stay patient and use strategies to help you focus on what matters most in those environments. For instance, last year I was attending a large conference with my husband, Mark. There were hundreds of people there, and it was quite noisy. I needed to listen carefully during a panel discussion. It was difficult to hear the speaker clearly because of the background noise. So I focused on the speaker's body language and the slides they were showing on the large screen. I also made sure to look at the other people in the audience to see if they were reacting in any way. Were they laughing? Nodding in agreement? This helped me follow the conversation and understand the main ideas, even though I couldn't catch every single word. This is a great tip for any situation where the listening environment isn't perfect. Whether you're in a crowded cafe or at a busy event, try to focus on other cues like body language, visual aids, or facial expressions to fill in the gaps. These strategies will help you stay on track and get the most out of your listening practice. But sometimes, it's not just about listening to English. It's about how you use your English when you speak. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to speak English confidently, but you were unsure of what to say next? This happens to everyone, but it doesn't mean you can't improve. Let's talk about some simple strategies you can use to improve your confidence when speaking. A while ago, I was speaking with a colleague, Daniel, during a work meeting. I had to explain a new idea I had for a project, but I was a little nervous. I knew that I had a good idea, but I wasn't sure how to present it effectively. Instead of worrying about speaking perfectly, I decided to use the listening techniques I've shared with you today. I paid close attention to Daniel's reactions, both his verbal and nonverbal cues. When I noticed he was nodding and looking interested, I felt more confident and kept going. I also practiced active listening, which helped me respond naturally to Daniel's questions. Instead of just giving a quick, short answer, I thought carefully about what he was asking and used phrases like, "That's a great point," or "I see what you mean by that." This helped the conversation flow smoothly and made me feel much more confident in my abilities. The next time you're in a conversation, try using active listening to guide your responses. Pay attention to the other person's reactions and adjust your answers based on what they're saying. This will help you stay engaged and sound more confident in English. Let's take a step back and think about the different ways you can use English in your daily life. Whether you're at work, at school, or just having a casual conversation with a friend, English is everywhere. And the more you use it in real-life situations, the more comfortable you'll feel with the language. When I first started learning English, I was very shy to speak with strangers. But over time, I realized that every single conversation was a chance to practice. Even simple interactions like ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions were opportunities to improve my listening and speaking skills. One of the most useful things I did was find a conversation partner. I met a fellow English learner named Sarah, and we made a habit of speaking in English whenever we met up for coffee. At first, our conversations were a little awkward, but over time, we both became much more comfortable. We would talk about our day, share stories, and ask each other questions. This helped me not only practice speaking, but also improved my listening skills because I was constantly exposed to natural English conversation. So, if you can find a conversation partner or join a community where you can practice speaking and listening regularly, this will make your English learning experience much more enjoyable and practical. You'll start to feel more confident and capable in your ability to communicate in English. Another great way to practice listening is by watching movies or TV shows in English. I know it can be tempting to watch them in your native language, but try watching something in English with English subtitles. Start by watching the movie without pausing, and try to catch as much as you can. Don't worry if you miss a few words. Just focus on understanding the general meaning. The more you do this, the more you'll start to recognize words and phrases in different contexts. As you watch, try to notice how the actors speak. Do they use contractions? Do they speak quickly or slowly? Do they have a specific accent? These are all important things to pay attention to when improving your listening skills. By watching different movies and shows, you'll expose yourself to various accents, speaking speeds, and vocabulary, all of which will help you become a more well-rounded English communicator. Lastly, let's talk about how you can take what you've learned from listening and apply it in your daily life. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment to practice. Every conversation is an opportunity to improve your listening and speaking skills. Whether it's talking to a colleague at work, chatting with a friend on the phone, or even ordering a coffee. Try to focus on the key points and use new vocabulary you've learned. If you don't understand something, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. You could say, "I'm sorry, could you say that again?" Or, "I didn't quite catch that. Could you explain it in a different way?" Asking questions will not only help you understand better, but it will also give you more confidence in speaking English. The journey to fluency is built on thousands of these small moments of practice and curiosity. Let's continue and dive deeper into how you can improve your English listening and speaking even further, with a more detailed look at some everyday situations where these skills are so important. First, I want to share a personal story that really shows how powerful listening can be in everyday life. A few months ago, I had a conversation with my husband Mark about a situation that happened when he was at work. He had to speak with a client who was upset because there was a delay in the delivery of their order. Mark was telling me how difficult it was to calm the client down because they were frustrated and didn't seem to want to listen to him at first. As he was telling me this story, I noticed that Mark was speaking quickly and seemed a little anxious, which made me realize just how stressful the situation must have been for him. But then, as he described how he managed to turn things around, I could hear the tone of his voice shift. He became more confident as he explained how he listened carefully to the client's concerns and asked open-ended questions to help understand what they really needed. In that moment, I realized that listening carefully to someone isn't just about understanding their words. It's also about understanding their emotions and concerns. It's about showing empathy and responding in a way that makes the other person feel heard. Mark didn't just give a quick response or try to rush through the conversation. He used active listening techniques, focusing on the client's feelings and making sure to address their needs. In your own English learning journey, it's essential to practice these active listening techniques. Whether you're listening to a podcast, a conversation with a friend, or even a work meeting, the goal should always be to really understand not just what's being said, but why it's being said and how the other person is feeling. This deeper level of listening helps you build stronger connections and make your conversations more meaningful. Next, let's talk about how you can use listening to help you with your writing skills. I know that might sound a little surprising, but it actually makes a lot of sense. The more you listen to natural English conversations, the more you can improve your writing. This is because listening helps you learn how sentences are structured and how words are used in context. You can then apply these same patterns when you write. For example, when I'm writing emails or notes for work, I often think back to conversations I've heard or had. If I'm writing to a colleague, I'll remember how they phrase things when they talk to me. If they use phrases like, "I'm looking forward to hearing from you," or "please don't hesitate to reach out," I might use similar expressions in my own emails. This helps my writing sound more natural and fluent. Also, when you're listening to English podcasts, TV shows, or even music, try to notice how native speakers form their sentences. Do they use short, simple sentences? Or do they often combine ideas into longer ones? Do they use a lot of idiomatic expressions? Or do they stick to more basic language? These things can help guide you as you write, making your own English sound more like the way people actually speak. A great way to practice is by listening to a story or podcast episode, and then writing a short summary of what you heard. This forces you to pay close attention to the main ideas and helps you learn how to express those ideas in your own words. Over time, this will improve both your listening and writing skills. You'll become more familiar with common phrases, sentence structures, and vocabulary that are used in daily conversations, which will help you when you need to write in English. Speaking of writing, let's talk about how listening can help you with writing more creatively. Creativity in writing doesn't just come from having good ideas. It comes from knowing how to express those ideas in an interesting way. Listening to different types of English media, like podcasts, audiobooks, and even movie dialogues, can give you a treasure trove of ideas and expressions that you can use to make your writing sound more engaging. I remember a time when I was writing a short story for a creative writing class. I was having trouble coming up with the right dialogue for my characters. I wanted them to sound natural, but I wasn't sure how to make their conversations flow well. So, I started listening to conversations in English TV shows. I paid attention to how people express emotions, how they make small talk, and how they tell stories. After listening to these examples, I realized that in real-life conversation, people don't always speak in perfect sentences. They might pause, start a sentence, and then change their mind, or use casual words that don't sound formal. This helped me make the dialogue in my story sound more real and more relatable. By listening to real-life conversations, you can get a better idea of how to write in a way that reflects how people really speak. This will make your writing feel more natural and engaging, especially if you want to write stories, essays, or even emails that sound like something a native English speaker might say. Now let's talk about how to deal with situations where you're struggling to understand something in English. This can happen to everyone, no matter what level of English they're at. I remember one time I was in a meeting with a client who had a strong accent, and at first, I couldn't understand everything they were saying. I started to get frustrated because I didn't want to ask them to repeat themselves too many times. But then I remembered something important. If you don't understand something, it's okay to ask for clarification. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you explain it again?" The client smiled and slowed down, and suddenly everything became much clearer. By asking for clarification in a polite way, I was able to get the information I needed without feeling embarrassed. This is a really important tip for you as well. When you're listening in English and you don't understand something, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. Whether you're listening to a podcast or speaking with someone, you can say things like, "Could you repeat that?" Or, "Can you say that in a different way?" These simple phrases can make a big difference in your understanding and make you feel more confident in your conversations. One strategy that helps me when I'm listening to a new language or unfamiliar accent is to try to focus on keywords. Even if I don't understand every single word, I try to pick out the important words that give me the overall meaning of what's being said. This technique works especially well when I'm listening to news reports, podcasts, or even interviews. By focusing on the key ideas, I'm able to piece together the context and understand what's being discussed, even if I don't know every word. It's also helpful to listen to the same content more than once. When I'm trying to improve my listening skills, I often listen to podcasts or interviews several times. The first time, I might only understand the main ideas. The second time, I can pick up on more details. By the third time, I start to notice patterns in how the speakers talk and the vocabulary they use. This repetition helps me improve my comprehension and builds my confidence when listening to English. You can do the same. When you're listening to something in English, don't just listen once and move on. Try to listen to the same content several times, each time focusing on something new. Maybe the first time you focus on understanding the general meaning. The next time you focus on specific vocabulary, and the third time you can pay attention to how the speaker's tone or body language adds to the message. This method of repetition will help you improve not only your listening, but also your ability to understand more complex conversations over time. Finally, let's talk about how listening and speaking go hand in hand when it comes to improving your overall English fluency. When you're listening to real-life conversations and engaging with the language in various ways, you start to internalize the language. This means that when you go to speak, you don't have to think so much about the words or grammar rules. Instead, the language flows more naturally because you've absorbed it through listening. Think about it like this. When you listen to English regularly, you're filling your language toolbox with words, phrases, and expressions. The more you listen, the more tools you have available when it's time to speak. So every time you listen, you're not just improving your ability to understand English, you're also making it easier to speak English fluently and naturally. Let's continue and dive deeper into how listening can help improve your English speaking, and how this skill can be applied in even more real-life situations. I'm excited to share even more tips that will help you use English naturally and confidently. Let's start with another personal experience. A while back, I was traveling for work and I ended up in a meeting with a group of international colleagues. They were from different countries, and English was not their first language. At first, it was a bit challenging because they had various accents, and I had to listen very carefully to understand what everyone was saying. But I soon realized something important that I want to share with you. In situations where you are exposed to different accents, you need to be patient and listen actively. When we're learning a language, we tend to get stuck on understanding specific words or trying to translate everything in our heads. But what's more important is to focus on the meaning behind the conversation. I remember one of my colleagues, Carlos, was speaking with a heavy Spanish accent, and at first, I couldn't catch everything. But then I stopped trying to understand each individual word and just focused on the overall message. Slowly, I was able to piece together his meaning, and the conversation became smoother. This is a really valuable tip for you, too. Try to listen to English with the goal of understanding the bigger picture, not just individual words. This will help you connect better with the speaker, especially when they use different phrases, idioms, or accent variations. And remember, the more you expose yourself to diverse accents, the better you will get at understanding English as a whole. It also made me think about how the culture of communication affects our understanding of English. In some cultures, people are very direct when they speak, while in others, they may be more indirect or polite. This cultural difference can affect how you listen to and interpret English. For example, in the UK, people often use indirect language when making requests. You might hear someone say, "I was wondering if it might be possible to," instead of saying directly, "Can you?" This might sound confusing at first, but with practice, you'll start to notice these small differences, and they will help you sound more natural when you speak. In addition to listening to different accents, it's important to listen to how people use tone and body language in their conversations. When I was in that international meeting, I noticed that some of my colleagues spoke more loudly, while others spoke more softly. I realized that their tone of voice was a key element of how they communicated their feelings. For example, if someone spoke loudly, it could mean they were excited or passionate about what they were saying, whereas speaking softly might indicate that they were being cautious or thoughtful. This taught me how tone can change the meaning of a sentence, even if the words are the same. This is another great piece of advice for you. Pay attention to the tone and body language of the people you're speaking with or listening to. By understanding the emotions behind the words, you will become a much better listener and communicator in English. For instance, if someone says, "I'm fine," but their tone is flat, you'll know they might not actually be fine. They could be feeling sad, stressed, or upset. And this is an important part of listening and responding in conversations. And here's an interesting way that listening can directly help with your speaking. When you listen to English content regularly, whether that's podcasts, TV shows, or YouTube videos, You start to internalize common phrases and expressions. These phrases can then pop up in your own conversations without you even thinking about it. It's like having a toolkit of phrases that you can pull out when you need them. The more you listen, the more these phrases become second nature. Let me give you an example. A few weeks ago, I was chatting with a colleague of mine, James, and during our conversation, he used the expression, "I'm on the same page." It's a common phrase in English that means, "I agree," or "I understand what you mean." I had heard this expression many times before, but hearing it in that specific context made me feel more confident in using it myself. The next day, I had a conversation with another colleague, and I ended up using the same expression. It felt so natural, because I had heard it used in real-life situations multiple times. By listening to conversations like this, you'll pick up on expressions that you can use in your own speech. You don't need to memorize these expressions. Just keep listening, and over time, they'll become a part of your active vocabulary. Speaking of active vocabulary, one way to improve your listening skills and vocabulary at the same time is by listening to content that challenges you, but not too much. For example, I love listening to English podcasts about current events. At first, some of the topics were difficult for me to understand, but I kept listening. The more I listened to the news in English, the more familiar I became with the vocabulary and phrases that were used to discuss various topics. I started to recognize certain words, and this made it easier to understand the next time I encountered them. This is a technique you can try too. Listen to something a little more advanced than your current level of understanding. Don't be discouraged if you don't understand everything at first. The more you challenge yourself, the more your vocabulary and listening skills will grow. Over time, these new words and expressions will become easier to understand and use in your own conversations. Now let's talk about how listening can make your writing sound more natural. This is something I've noticed in my own work, and it's especially helpful for those of you who want to improve your writing for emails, presentations, or even personal projects. When I listen to a podcast or interview in English, I pay close attention to how the speakers organize their ideas. Are they speaking in short, simple sentences, or do they use more complex sentence structures? Do they use formal or informal language? And how do they transition from one idea to the next? By observing these patterns, I can apply them to my own writing. For example, I was writing a report for work and I wanted to make it sound more professional. I listened to a few English podcasts on business topics and noticed how the speakers used formal language and structured their sentences. I took note of some of the phrases they used, such as, "in conclusion," "based on the data," and "it's important to note." These phrases helped me sound more polished and professional when I wrote my report. The same strategy works for any kind of writing, whether it's a formal email, a story, or even a social media post. By listening to native speakers, you can learn how to write in a way that sounds natural and appropriate for the situation. Another technique that can improve both your listening and writing is the practice of summarizing. After listening to a podcast or a conversation, take a few minutes to summarize what you heard. This will force you to listen carefully and pay attention to the main points. You can practice this by writing down the key ideas and then turning them into a short summary. This exercise helps you develop your writing skills by focusing on the most important information and presenting it clearly. I did this when I was preparing for a presentation at work. I listened to several English podcasts on the topic I was going to talk about and wrote summaries of each episode. This helped me better understand the content and gave me ideas for how to structure my own presentation. The more I practiced, the better I became at both listening to new information and turning it into something clear and concise. One of the best things about listening to real-life English conversations is that you get a sense of how language is used in the real world. It's different from textbooks or language apps, which often teach you isolated phrases or words. When you listen to how people speak naturally, you start to understand how to use language in real-world situations. You can hear how people use informal language, slang, and idioms to make their conversations more lively and engaging. This makes your learning more practical and relevant to everyday life. For example, I remember once listening to an interview with a famous chef, and she said something that really stuck with me. In the kitchen, it's all about getting your hands dirty. This expression was not just about cooking, it was about the importance of hard work and getting involved in the process. I love this phrase because it captured the essence of how language can be used creatively to express a message in a fun and memorable way. As you continue to improve your English listening skills, you'll start to notice these creative uses of language all around you. The more you listen, the more you'll be able to use these same techniques in your own speaking and writing. And that's what will make you sound more natural and fluent in English. Thank you for your patience. And I'm really excited to continue exploring this important topic of improving your English listening skills through real-life situations. This is something that can make your English not just sound more natural, but also more engaging and effective in all kinds of situations. Now let's dive even deeper into how listening to English, especially in daily conversations, can help you improve both your speaking and writing skills. I want to start with an example from a very personal experience of mine that might be really helpful for you to think about. I remember a few years ago, I had the chance to visit a small town in Canada. I went to this small local cafe to enjoy a cup of coffee, and I overheard a conversation between the owner and a customer. The customer was talking about how busy their week had been, and the owner responded with something that immediately caught my attention. "Sounds like you're running on empty." At first, I was a bit confused. I didn't understand what running on empty meant. But then I thought about it for a moment and realized it was an expression meaning that the person was exhausted, like a car running out of fuel. This little moment really helped me improve my understanding of English in a big way. I learned an idiom that I hadn't come across before, and it also gave me insight into how people speak informally, in a way that is different from textbook English. This is a great lesson for you too. When you hear new phrases or expressions, take a moment to understand them. Don't just skip over them or assume you don't need to learn them. Take the time to research, ask questions, and think about how they could be used in other situations. Now think about the importance of context in conversations. It's not just about understanding individual words. It's about understanding the bigger picture of the conversation. For example, when I was at that cafe, I realized that understanding the mood of the conversation was just as important as knowing the individual words. The customer was telling the owner about their stressful week, so when the owner said, "You must be running on empty," it wasn't just a random comment. It was a way of showing empathy and understanding. The owner wasn't just repeating a phrase they heard somewhere. They were using it to connect with the customer's feelings. This is a skill you can use in your own conversations as well. When you listen carefully to the emotions and feelings behind the words, you can engage with people on a much deeper level. English isn't just about memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules. It's about learning how to express yourself in a way that resonates with others. This is something I've had to learn, especially when speaking with people from different cultures or backgrounds. For instance, I once had a conversation with someone from Japan, and they told me, "I'm a little bit tired, but I'll be okay." I immediately recognized that their "little bit tired" meant they were likely much more tired than they were letting on. This awareness of subtle language cues is something you can develop by listening attentively. Speaking of emotional cues, let me tell you about another situation that taught me something really interesting about listening. A few months ago, I attended a public speaking workshop. The presenter, Sarah, was giving a talk on how to communicate more effectively, and she shared a powerful tip that I still use today. She said, "When you're speaking to someone, it's not enough to just focus on the words. Pay attention to their body language, their tone of voice, and their facial expressions." She then demonstrated this with a simple exercise. She asked someone in the audience to say, "I'm fine," while looking sad, and then asked another person to say the same phrase with a smile. The meaning of the phrase completely changed based on the tone and body language. This exercise helped me understand how listening isn't just about hearing words. It's about interpreting how those words are delivered. This lesson really clicked for me when I had a conversation with my friend Liam a few days after the workshop. He had been dealing with a lot of stress at work, and when I asked him how he was doing, he replied with, "I'm fine." But his tone was flat, and his body language showed that he wasn't really fine. This moment reminded me of the importance of paying attention to everything that's going on in a conversation, not just the words themselves. This is another way you can improve your listening skills. Focus not just on what's said, but how it's said. Another powerful way listening can help improve your English is by learning how to use phrases that you hear in real-life conversations. These phrases are often not found in textbooks, but they're extremely useful in everyday communication. For example, I once heard a colleague say, "I'll get back to you on that," when they couldn't answer a question right away. I had heard the phrase before, but I didn't fully understand its meaning until I heard it used in context. It's a polite way of saying that you'll return to someone with more information later. After hearing this, I started using it in my own conversations. I noticed that people seemed to appreciate the polite tone, and it made me sound more natural when speaking. This is something I highly recommend for you too. When you hear a useful phrase, try to use it yourself in conversations. This will not only help you sound more natural, but it will also make you feel more confident in your ability to communicate in English. And remember, you don't have to use every phrase you hear, but pick the ones that fit your personality and style. Over time, these phrases will become second nature, and they'll help you sound more fluent. Let's also talk about how listening to English in real-life situations can improve your writing. When you listen to how people speak in different settings, whether that's a casual conversation with friends, a formal meeting, or a lecture, you get a better understanding of how to structure your own writing. For instance, I recently listened to a podcast about business communication, and I noticed how the speakers always introduced their main points clearly and then supported them with examples. This made their speech much more effective and easy to follow. I applied this strategy to an email I was writing to a client. Instead of jumping straight into the details, I started with a clear introduction that outlined the purpose of my message. Then I supported my points with examples. Just like I had heard on the podcast, this helped my emails sound more professional and organized. And the best part was that the client responded positively, saying that my message was clear and well-structured. One of the greatest benefits of listening to real-life English is that you can pick up these small techniques that can make a big difference in your writing. By observing how native speakers organize their ideas and express themselves, you can apply those same techniques to your own writing. This will make your emails, reports, and even creative writing projects sound much more polished and natural. Now let's take a step back and think about how listening to real-life conversation can change your approach to learning English. Often, we get stuck in the idea that we need to study grammar rules or vocabulary lists in isolation. But in reality, the best way to learn English is by exposing yourself to the language in real, natural settings. For instance, when I was learning English, I spent hours listening to radio shows, podcasts, and even watching TV shows in English. These real-life examples helped me understand how language works in everyday conversations, and it helped me get more comfortable using it in my own life. I remember one time I was watching a documentary about a famous artist, and I heard a phrase that stuck with me: "His work speaks for itself." I had heard this phrase before, but hearing it used in a context where it made sense really helped me understand its meaning. The artist was so talented that no explanation was needed. His artwork was enough to communicate his message. This helped me realize that listening to real-life content allows you to pick up phrases and idioms in a more meaningful way. By actively listening to English in various forms, whether that's podcasts, movies, conversations, or lectures, you start to build a more authentic understanding of the language. You hear the language used in context, and you begin to see how it fits into different situations. This is an excellent way to improve both your speaking and writing because it helps you learn not just the words, but the culture and context behind those words. Lastly, let me offer a small but powerful tip for improving your listening skills even further. Try listening to content at different speeds. In the beginning, you might find it easier to listen to slower-paced conversations or podcasts, but as you progress, try listening to faster-paced content. This will challenge your listening skills and help you get used to understanding native speakers who talk quickly. It's just like lifting weights at the gym. The more you push yourself, the stronger you become. I did this with a podcast that I listened to regularly. At first, I struggled to keep up with the fast pace, but I kept at it. And now I find it much easier to understand faster conversations. This practice has not only improved my listening, but also my ability to think quickly in English. It's a great way to build confidence and improve your overall fluency. As you continue to practice, remember to keep pushing yourself. The more you listen to English in real-world situations, the more you will grow as a speaker and writer. Keep exposing yourself to different accents, tones, and contexts, and don't be afraid to challenge yourself. The progress you make will be well worth the effort. I'm glad you're enjoying this journey of improving your English through real-life experiences and conversations. It's amazing how much you can learn just by paying attention to the language around you. Now let's dive even deeper into how real-life listening can not only improve your speaking and writing, but also your overall fluency and understanding of the language. When you listen to real-life conversations, you start to notice certain things that you don't find in textbooks or language courses. For example, I remember a conversation I had with my colleague Daniel, who had been living in the U.S. for a few years. We were talking about how people in different parts of the country use different slang and expressions. Daniel mentioned how in the Midwest, people often say, "You bet," instead of simply saying, "Yes," or "Of course." At first, I didn't really understand why this phrase was used. But then Daniel explained that it was a way to show enthusiasm or confidence in an agreement. This moment really opened my eyes to the importance of understanding regional expressions and slang. It's not just about speaking the textbook English, it's about connecting with people in a way that makes you sound more natural and fluent. I decided to practice using some regional expressions in my conversations to see how people reacted. To my surprise, people loved it. When I used expressions like "you bet" in the right context, people saw me as more approachable and relatable. This helped me build better connections with native speakers, which is an essential part of improving your language skills. What's fascinating is that these little expressions and phrases are all part of what we call linguistic identity. Each region, culture, and group of people has its own unique way of speaking, and by learning these differences, you can communicate more effectively with others from all over the world. Think about it. When you meet someone who uses expressions or phrases you recognize, it creates an instant bond. You're able to connect with them on a deeper level because you both understand the subtleties of language. Now let's talk about how real-life listening experiences can help you improve your writing. Often we think that improving writing requires sitting down with a pen and paper, but in reality, it's about absorbing language and understanding its structure in everyday situations. For instance, I once listened to a TED Talk by a famous writer, and they shared a simple but profound tip. Great writing starts with great listening. At first, this might sound strange. How can listening help with writing? But when you listen to how native speakers communicate, whether in casual conversations or professional settings, you begin to understand the rhythm, structure, and flow of the language. Take a moment to think about a recent conversation you had. What was the main point of the conversation? How did the person start and finish their sentences? What kinds of words and phrases did they use to make their point clear? Now, imagine writing a piece that captures the same flow and rhythm. If you've been listening to real-life English, you'll have a better idea of how to organize your thoughts and use the right words to make your writing sound more natural. I found this technique particularly useful when writing emails or reports at work. When I listen to how people structure their thoughts in everyday conversations, I apply those techniques to my writing. For example, when giving an update on a project, I often start with a clear and concise sentence that summarizes the main point. Then I break it down into smaller details. just like I would in a conversation. By doing this, my writing becomes easier to understand and more engaging. Another aspect of real-life listening that improves writing is understanding how tone and emotion influence language. When people speak, they often use tone to express their feelings. For example, if you're listening to a story about a recent trip someone took, you might notice how their voice changes when they talk about the exciting parts of the trip versus the more stressful moments. This tone adds depth to the story and makes it more engaging for the listener. As a writer, you can use the same approach to make your writing more dynamic. For instance, if you're writing a story or an email, think about how your tone shifts in different situations. Are you expressing excitement, concern, or humor? Let me give you another example from my personal life. A few months ago, I went on a hiking trip with a group of friends, and we had some really interesting conversations along the way. One moment that stuck with me was when my friend Emma was describing a challenging part of the hike. She said, "It felt like I was walking through a jungle. Every step I took, the path got harder, and the trees seemed to close in on me." The way she described it made the experience feel so vivid and real. As she spoke, I could hear the excitement and challenge in her voice. This made me realize how powerful tone and word choice can be when telling a story. Later, I applied this idea to my own writing, and it helped me describe events and experiences in a much more engaging way. I want to encourage you to start thinking about tone and emotion in your own listening and writing practices. Next time you listen to a podcast, a conversation, or even a TV show, pay close attention to how speakers use their voice to convey emotions. Notice how they use pauses, changes in pitch, and speed to express different feelings. This is something you can easily incorporate into your writing. For example, if you're writing about a happy memory, use words that reflect that joy. If you're writing about a difficult situation, choose words that convey the struggle or frustration. Now let's explore another key element of listening practice that can significantly improve your English: focusing on listening for specific details. In real-life conversations, people often speak quickly, and sometimes they don't give you every detail you need. This is where your listening skills become really important. In order to fully understand a conversation, you need to be able to pick out the main points, even if some information is left unsaid. For example, during a meeting at work, someone might say, "We need to finish this by next Thursday." They might not specify the exact time, but you can infer that it's important to have everything done before the end of the day. Being able to fill in those gaps is a crucial listening skill. I learned this skill during a trip to the UK a few years ago. I was talking to a shopkeeper about a product I wanted to buy. She said, "We only have 2 of those left, but we're expecting a new shipment next week." She didn't tell me the exact day of the shipment, but I quickly understood that I had to make my decision soon. This experience taught me how to listen for the most important details without getting lost in every word. When you practice listening to real-life conversations, try to focus on the key pieces of information. For instance, when you're watching a news report or listening to a podcast, try to identify the main message of the story. What is the speaker trying to convey? What's the main point? If you focus on this, you'll start to notice how much easier it becomes to understand conversations and how quickly you can process new information. In addition to listening for details, it's also helpful to pay attention to how speakers organize their thoughts. This is something that will greatly improve your writing skills as well. For example, in a conversation, people often start with a general idea, then explain it in more detail, and finally summarize the key points. When you're listening to a story, notice how the speaker introduces the topic, provides examples, and then wraps it up. This structure can be applied to your writing, whether you're writing a story, a report, or an email. The more you listen to how people organize their thoughts, the easier it will be for you to organize your own ideas in a clear and logical way. Lastly, don't forget to practice active listening. This is a skill that's important in both listening and speaking. Active listening means fully engaging with the speaker and showing that you're paying attention. For example, when someone is telling you a story, nodding your head, asking follow-up questions, and making eye contact are all ways to show that you're engaged. This not only helps you understand the conversation better, but also builds stronger connections with others. In the same way, when you're writing, think about how you can engage your reader. Ask yourself, how can I make my writing feel interactive and engaging? How can I connect with my reader on a deeper level? In the end, real-life listening practice is one of the most powerful tools you can use to improve your English. It helps you understand how the language is used in different contexts, how people express emotions and ideas, and how to organize your own thoughts when you speak and write. By listening to natural conversations and paying attention to details, you'll become more confident and fluent in English. Let's continue exploring how real-life listening experiences can further improve your English, as well as expand the skills you're building in this process. Another fascinating aspect of real-life listening is how people naturally use pauses and intonation to convey meaning. Have you ever noticed how when someone is telling a story, they might pause for dramatic effect before revealing something important, or when they're building up to the climax of a story? Their tone rises to create suspense. These subtle techniques are used in conversation to guide the listener's attention and help them understand the speaker's emotional state. For example, I remember when I was talking to my husband about a surprise trip we took last year. I started by saying, "You're never going to believe what happened." I paused for a moment, and my husband looked at me with anticipation. I continued, "We were at the airport, and I didn't even know where we were going until we got to the gate." My dramatic pause made him curious about the surprise, and the way I delivered the sentence made the experience more exciting. These pauses and shifts in intonation are often natural in casual conversations, and they give you a sense of the emotional journey the speaker is going through. By paying attention to how these pauses are used in real-life conversations, you can learn how to apply them to your own speaking. When you're speaking in English, think about the moments where you can build anticipation or create emphasis through your tone and pauses. This makes your speech much more engaging and expressive. This also brings us to another important aspect: storytelling. In real life, humans are natural storytellers, and every day we share small stories in our conversations. These can range from telling someone about your day to recounting an experience you had last week. Stories are a crucial part of communication. And learning how to tell your own stories effectively can make you sound more fluent in English. I've had many chances to tell stories in my life, and one of the most memorable ones happened last summer. I was visiting an old friend, Sarah, and we went on a hike together. As we walked, I told her about a funny situation that happened at work a few weeks ago. I started the story with, "So, picture this. I'm sitting in a meeting, and suddenly my boss starts talking about a project I had no idea was even happening." This gave Sarah a mental picture of the scene, which helped her follow along with the story more easily. When telling a story, you can make it more engaging by setting the scene and giving the listener context. This technique is a powerful tool to help your audience follow the story and connect with you emotionally. If you're telling a story in English, try using descriptive language and vivid details. It will not only help your listener understand the story better, but will also make you sound more fluent. You can practice telling stories by starting with simple events in your own life and gradually adding more detail as you get more comfortable with your speaking skills. In terms of listening practice, storytelling is a wonderful way to absorb the rhythm and structure of natural conversations. When you're listening to someone tell a story, pay attention to the sequence of events, how the speaker builds tension, and how they end the story. These are all important elements to include when telling your own stories in English. As you listen to stories, you'll start to notice how speakers manage their pacing, which will help you do the same when it's your turn to speak. Real-life listening also exposes you to various styles of communication. For instance, in some conversations, people may speak quickly and use slang, while in others, they may slow down and choose their words carefully. This variety helps you become a more flexible listener. Sometimes when I talk to my friend James, he speaks incredibly fast and uses a lot of slang, which I've had to get used to. But when I speak with my colleague Ruth, she speaks more slowly and clearly, using more formal language. Both types of speech are valuable to listen to, as they expose you to different ways of expressing ideas in English. Understanding different speech styles can also make you a more adaptable speaker. If you know how to switch between formal and informal language based on the situation, you will be able to communicate more effectively. For example, when speaking with a colleague or in a professional setting, you might use more formal language, such as, "Could you please send me the report by the end of the day?" But when talking to a friend or family member, you might say, "Hey, can you send me that report later?" Another key component of real-life listening is understanding how people use humor and sarcasm. Humor is a huge part of everyday communication, and learning how to recognize and use it can greatly improve your speaking and listening abilities. Let me share a funny example from my life. One day, my husband and I were watching a movie, and he made a comment that caught me off guard. He said, "Well, that was the best movie I've ever seen." Not. He was using sarcasm to joke about how bad the movie was, and I could tell by the tone of his voice that he didn't actually think it was the best movie ever. Humor like this is common in everyday conversations, and it's important to listen carefully to how people use tone and context to express humor or sarcasm. By practicing listening to these subtle cues, you can start using humor more naturally in your own conversations. Sarcasm, jokes, and playful comments are often used among friends and family. so they're valuable to understand if you want to sound more like a native speaker. Along with humor, irony is another important aspect of real-life listening. Irony often involves saying something that is opposite to what you really mean. For example, if someone is caught in a rainstorm and says, "Oh, great, just what I needed," they're expressing frustration. But they're doing so in an ironic way. Understanding irony can be tricky, but it's a great skill to have when learning English. Pay attention to how people use irony in conversations and try to understand their underlying emotions or intentions. Next, let's talk about the importance of repetition in real-life listening practice. One thing I found incredibly helpful when learning a language is listening to the same conversation multiple times. Each time you listen, you notice something new. For example, the first time I listened to a conversation between two friends, I was focused on the main idea. But the second time, I paid more attention to the tone and body language. By listening to the same material repeatedly, you start to absorb the language on a deeper level. This practice is particularly useful when you're working with longer texts or stories. You might not catch everything the first time, but by listening to the same conversation several times, you'll begin to recognize vocabulary, sentence structures, and pronunciation. This is why it's important to keep exposing yourself to different listening materials and revisiting them over time. As you continue practicing real-life listening, you'll notice that your comprehension and pronunciation improve naturally. The more you listen to real conversations, the more you start to understand the flow of speech, sentence structure, and informal expressions. And as you work on your own speaking, you'll find that these elements naturally start to appear in your speech. You'll sound more natural, more fluent, and more confident when speaking English. If you're focusing on improving your listening skills, it's essential to not only listen to recordings or podcasts, but also to engage in real conversations with friends, family, or even strangers give you a chance to practice real-time listening. It's one thing to listen to a scripted conversation, but it's a whole new challenge to keep up with a spontaneous dialogue. Real-life listening also teaches you how to ask for clarification. In everyday life, people don't always speak clearly or use perfect grammar. Sometimes they speak quickly, mumble, or use unfamiliar words. But rather than feeling frustrated, you can practice asking for clarification. For instance, if someone says, "I'm meeting her at the cafe," and you don't understand which cafe they're talking about, you could ask, "Which cafe do you mean?" This gives you the opportunity to practice speaking and asking questions in English, while also improving your listening skills. By regularly practicing these strategies and engaging with real-life conversations, your listening skills will improve significantly. You'll become better at understanding different speech patterns, picking up on cultural nuances, and using natural expressions in your own conversations. And the more you practice, the more you'll be able to understand and enjoy conversations in English. Whether you're listening to a podcast, chatting with a friend, or even traveling abroad. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that listening to these real-life stories and examples has helped you gain some valuable insights into how you can improve both your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, the key to progress is practice. So keep listening to real conversations, paying attention to details like tone, pauses, and humor. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification when needed. On the English in Advance podcast community, we upload new episodes every week. So if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more fun and practical English tips. Keep practicing, keep listening, and you'll notice improvements in no time. Thanks again for being part of the community. And I'll catch you in the next episode. Happy learning.